Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in global environmental conflicts, we will be talking about geographical exploration, search for resources. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Dr. Mayank Kumar. Dr. Kumar is Associate Professor, Department of History in Satyavati College Evening, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you, Manpreet, and good afternoon, viewers. As you know, this is part of a longer series, Global Environmental Conflict, and in that context, today's lecture will be focusing on geographical exploration, search for resources. What I am trying to do at the moment with you is that we have been dealing with the primacy of energy resources. In that context, we have tried to locate the human resource and its importance. And in that context, I was trying to argue that in what ways slave mode of production and feudal mode of productions both have exploited natural resources in terms of population, human resources. Today, I am trying to suggest that feudal formations, which have been basically regionalist formations, how they attain or we witness a transition from regional formations to global formation, because we are basically dealing with global environmental conflicts. So let me now move from regional to global. I am nowhere suggesting that we will not be focusing on regional. We will be going to regional and local issues, but my concern at the moment is to show in what ways in its endeavor to exploit natural resources and endeavor to exploit environmental resources, humans have been trying to move beyond their region and explore new frontiers. In that process of exploration of new frontiers, global explorations took place, and one of the most important landmark or transitional phase can be termed as geographical exploration. Those who have history background or those who are basically aware of world history, they can understand that 14th, 15th, 16th centuries have seen exploration by European travelers, European explorers, and that is the period when we witnessed discovery of, so-called discovery of America. It was there, but it was discovered by the Occidental and Oriental societies, so it is termed as, because we are writing history for them, so it is discovery of America, Americas, not America only. So this process, how this process in itself can be seen as an issue of global environmental conflict or in terms of environmental conflict. To develop that argument, let me briefly discuss with you in what ways feudal formations are providing backdrop, as well as how they have been playing an important role on which we see growth of global environmental conflict and emergence at global level. As we were discussing, land has been the primary source of income. Land means agrarian sources, forest resources, mineral resources. Most of them are based on land. So land was basically contested issue. In terms of environmental issues, the land and its use, the land, its utilization process, forest, its exploitation, mineral resources, its exploitation, and human resources and its exploitation have been primary focus of this course till date. Now we are trying to move beyond Europe or beyond regional formations of Asia. What we are also trying to suggest that with this we witness a new kind of sources are emerging, resources are emerging, and those new resources, those new natural resources give rise to new kind of environmental conflicts. Most of the historians have termed this phase as conflict for land. My argument is that yes, land is the primacy. I cannot deny that, the primary role of land. What I am trying to argue that with the geographical exploration, we witness global integration, global interconnections. Americas, Europe, Asia, Far Asia, all these regions come together, and environmental resources of one region becomes raw material for the other region, finished good of one region becomes consumer good for the other region. So these global interconnections, when they emerge, they give rise to a new kind of conflict over environmental resources. Let me also say that I will be discussing this as a pre-Columbian phase and post-Columbian phase, which means with the discovery of America by the Columbus, period prior to that and period after that. So, pre-Columbian era, when we describe that, there are two categories of civilizations were basically understood. I am not denying that there are subspecies also, subtypes also, but broadly they have been classified in terms of Occidental and Oriental. Occidental means Western societies, and Oriental, to which we belong, the Asian civilizations. This classification is very broad, very vague, but this has been used by historians and contemporary people to describe two different kinds of civilization. One is Occidental and the other is Oriental. Rather, Occidental gets its identity in contrast to Oriental, and similarly Oriental gets its identity in contrast to Occidental. So, these two traditional civilizations have been sustaining. I am not denying Egypt is there, I am not denying Africa is highly populated, there are civilizations. What I am trying to suggest that broadly globe was divided into two broad categories, Occidental and Oriental. Now we are witnessing entry of another continent. There are two continents, South America and North America. In what ways this changes the whole scenario, and in what ways land, which has been the primary source of resources, changes and ocean becomes an important area of contestation. Before we move into ocean, let me also briefly mention that pre-Columbian world was basically defined by land-based empires. Mughal Empire, Ming Dynasty in China, Safavid in Iran, Ottomans, Turkey, Uzbeks, Central Asia. These are massive, big land-based empire. Their resource base was agrarian resources. They were also exploiting flora and fauna, but that was minor. Horses from Central Asia, horses from Arabian Peninsula were being imported and used in Indian Peninsula. All these interconnections were there. A kind of connectivity between Europe and Asia was there. But most of the time it was land-based empire which was dominating. Mughal Empire with all its paraphernalia. You must be aware because we are from India and we are discussing Indian civilization primarily. So, Mughal Empire is a massive empire. It's land-based empire. It rarely ventures into ocean. Because ocean is yet to be mapped, yet to be conquered, yet to be explored. Please remember, when I say ocean, I am not talking about Bay of Bengal. Bay of Bengal was extensively explored by Indian as well as Far Eastern civilizations. So much so, the eastern coast of India is known as Coromandel, and this term Coromandel has come from Cholamandalam. Cholas were claiming Bay of Bengal as Jheel of, a lake for the Cholas. They had extended their empire to Srivijaya kingdom right across Bay of Bengal, which means oceans were being explored. We have evidence that Chinese ships were coming to Indian Ocean. They were coming as far as Calicut. There is a classic article by Richard Eaton on that. Well, I am not denying that. I am simply suggesting that the sea route from India to Asia was yet to be explored. The major land route was India became interport. Spices were coming from east to India, and from India via Arabian Sea to Persian Gulf or to the Red Sea, and they move into Arabian Peninsula, cross over, and they reach Mediterranean Sea. And from Mediterranean Sea, various destinations in Europe, either through land or via Gibraltar, they move into English Channel. So that link was there. Similarly, as we say about the Bay of Bengal, Mediterranean world was highly explored. Relationship between Italy and Spain on one hand, and Northern Africa, Egypt and other countries on the Northern Africa, they were highly integrated since ancient times. So, I am not suggesting that the ocean was to be explored for the first time. I am simply suggesting that the most of the dynasties, the big empires were land-based empire. They rarely dependent on oceanic sources or resources from across the oceans. This changes later on, and these changes are important because these changes in itself are a reflection of growing conflict over environmental resources, natural resources. Let me also suggest that the long or the clove is known as Yavan Priya. Yavan means the Greeks. It was so close to them that it is known as Yavan Priya. They were importing spices from Indian Ocean. They were importing spices from India, from Ceylon, from Sri Java Kingdom, Java, Sumatra. All these societies were exporting spices which were coming in India, and from India they were transported to Arab. From Arab they went into Europe. So a connectivity between Occident and Orient was there, and the basic issue of contest was spice trade. Spice not only provided flavor to their food, but spice were also important. In absence of refrigeration, the black pepper and clove were important ingredient to preserve their meat. So it was almost of a daily need, daily consumption that they required these spices. And trade in spices was highly profitable. I'm not suggesting that there were no other articles. There was silk was exported, silk was traded, cotton was traded. Later on, indigo becomes an important component. Indigo was there earlier also, but it attains a different magnitude later on. So indigo, cotton, silk, but spice was the primary mover of trade between these areas, between Occident and Orient. When these were taking place, we witnessed a religious conflict between Islam and Christianity. This religious conflict focused or exploited this spice trade. With the fall of Constantinople in the hands of Ottomans, what happened that they started monopolizing trade which was coming from east and moving towards west. And they said, we require much more premium. We don't allow it. We won't allow it. We want to control this trade of natural product. So a kind of environmental conflict is taking place. A food item which is basic necessity for the European civilization, but which was not available in their country, which was available basically in tropical countries of east, they were being monopolized by intermediaries sitting in Arab and basically followers of Islam. It is a broad classification, because my focus is not on religious studies, neither on political history. I am simply borrowing from these disciplines to explain in what ways these environmental resources, these natural resources were contested between two civilizations. One can be termed as Christian civilization and the other can be termed as Islamic civilization. With this blockade by the Islamic civilization, Europe started exploring new routes, because they were concerned that unless we explore new route, it is almost impossible to procure at cheaper rate, at reasonable rate, these spices which are easily available in the eastern countries. Let me show you the map, because that will help you. This is what Vasco da Gama was doing. He was moving from Europe, covering whole of Africa, coming to Cape of Good Hope, and then he ventured into via Zimbabwe towards India. This route was explored by Vasco da Gama to bypass the impasse which was created by Ottomans and Islamic civilization, which earlier used to pass through Arabia and Central Asian region. So land-based empire, relying on their monopoly on land routes, gradually started controlling spice trade. This Asian domination of spice trade, especially South Asian domination, was being exploited by the Arabian Peninsulan civilizations, but which was creating problem for the Occidental societies. So they were trying to bypass this area. Let me also mention at this point, though it is not part of this lecture, but you should know that the importance of Persian Gulf and Red Sea is such that later on Suez Canal was built to link Red Sea with the Mediterranean, because they were aware this is the cheapest and the smallest, shortest route between Asia and Europe if you are using the oceans. The other route which crossed whole of Africa was not only time consuming, it was energy intensive, as well as it had much more vulnerability. The sea at the end of South Africa is very volatile. It's not very good for the sailing communities even today. So they were avoiding that area. Perhaps that was one of the reasons why they could not cross that area earlier. Even today, those who travel in that area, they clearly say that as you move up from the South Africa towards Europe in the Atlantic Ocean, you cannot follow route closer to the coast. On the western African coast is so turmoil prone that they have to take a diversion within the ocean towards America, and then they come back towards Gibraltar, towards Mediterranean Sea, because the area in between is turmoil prone for the movement of ships even today. So what I am trying to suggest that we witness change in the attitude towards environmental resources. Environmental resource of East were not being easily made available to West. The reason were political, the reason were religious, but the tool which they use is environmental. The tool which they use is natural resource, which we termed as spices. To cross this, to challenge this, European civilizations were trying to explore new areas, new vistas were being opened. Those who are from history and even those who are not from history, they should remember I am not going to deal two important topics, but which are part of this deliberation, which provides backdrop to my discussion, is Renaissance and Reformation in Europe. Renaissance, where they tried to recreate the ancient civilization, challenging the domination of Holy Roman Empire, challenging the domination of Papal state, that Roman state, Holy Roman Empire cannot dominate us. That is the period when in political terms we witness emergence of texts like The Prince by Machiavelli, which means state is becoming important and feudal powers are being diminished. Not only state vis-a-vis the decentralization processes, but also vis-a-vis religious power. The Holy Roman Empire's power is being challenged. Please remember, this is the period when 1/3 of land is controlled by Holy Roman Empire across the states of Europe. Most of the state, 1/3 of land was usually under the control of papacy, the Pope. So Pope was one of the biggest landowner. Their dogmatic practices were being challenged, and in that challenge, the two countries which took lead is basically Portugal and Spain. I will be coming to that later on as well. But to provide a background, you must remember it is Spain and Portugal which took the lead, and then they started exploring new areas. Since Mediterranean route through Constantinople is being blocked, route through Arabian Sea is being blocked, so they were exploring new areas. In that exploration, if Vasco da Gama reached India, so Columbus reached America across the Atlantic Ocean, which means for the first time they witnessed a new landmass. Since they were not aware of its existence, the civilization either of Occident or Orient, none of them were aware of existence of America, so they termed that as, because they were searching for India, it is Indies. Later on it was termed as West Indies. East Indies is India and West Indies is basically islands located closer to America, which means they are western part of that. Which means new land is being discovered. New land is being discovered. Possibility of new kind of resources emerges. Now you need to control it and contest over these new resources, so-called new resources, that is land, is contested initially between Portugal and Spain, but later on other European countries also chip in. France, England, to later extent Netherlands also chips in. Which means now they are moving from land-based empire to controlling regions across the ocean. Those who are aware will immediately realize that this opening of massive land mass opened up a new kind of possibilities of exploitation of nature, natural resources, and new kind of environmental conflict can be seen in these. Two briefly I mentioned, then I move because then I will come back and discuss that later on. One is gradually Red Indians from the America were wiped out. It's an environmental conflict. They could not withstand the kind of viruses which European civilization was carrying. They could not withstand. And the other is control over already existing civilizations in South America and imposition of European empire to exploit their natural resources. That is the environmental conflict which I am trying to examine for you to understand. Let me come back to once again to mainland of Europe, and then if westward America is made available, then when we move towards south in our attempt to come to east, move south means crossing the whole of Africa, then we come across a massive landmass called Africa. The whole western coast is explored, later on the eastern coast is explored. Even today, one of the major colonies of England was in South Africa, and you must be aware of apartheid and the issues related with that. It is basically conflict between white settlers as well as the local inhabitants of that area. Why were they settling there? To ensure that the trade route remains open. Not only that, they were also trying to ensure that further exploration in Africa and resources of Africa should be managed by them only. Because on the northern part, it was the French who were making inroads, especially in Algeria and other parts of Africa. So on the one hand you have America, on the other hand you have Africa, which are being explored. Not only being explored, they are being contested between empires, between states. Empires are yet to emerge in Europe, the big empires, because they have their own limitations, as they were basically part of feudal mode of production. An interesting fact, because that will locate what kind of environmental conflict I am trying to suggest. Inter Caetera. Inter Caetera was a papal bull issued by Pope Alexander IV on May 4, 1493, which granted to Spain all lands west and south of pole to pole line, 100 leagues west and south of any island of the Azores and the Cape of Verde Island. What it suggests is that the Holy Roman Empire, the papacy, issued a bull. Papal bull means a decree, an order, which said that the globe is divided into two parts. Now globe has been divided into two parts. The western part will go to Spain and the eastern part will come to Portugal. The whole globe is divided by Europe. They said that they are almost master of it since they have discovered this area. So anything west of it belongs to Spain, anything east of it belongs to Portugal. This decree in itself is suggestive of an attempt by papacy to avoid the conflict between these two important states. The land is being divided. There is an imaginary line which suggests that west of it belongs to Spain and the east of it belongs to Portugal. Portugal is not allowed to venture into west of it to exploit natural resources, and Spain is not allowed to venture into east to exploit resources in eastern part. Is it not manifestation of environmental conflict? And its nature at the moment is global, that you are dividing the whole globe into two. And who is doing this? The Holy Roman Empire, the Pope. It's a papal decree, which means they are aware that natural resources are in scarcity and we need to claim control over it. How do you claim control over it? There is a legitimacy by the Pope. It is the religious legitimacy through which they are trying to control different parts of globe for their own control, for their own benefit, which ultimately helps them, and that we will be discussing in the subsequent lectures also. At the moment, let me briefly mention that the western part witnesses plantation economy. Both the Americas witness plantation economy, and then the slave trade from Europe coming to West Africa. From West Africa they are importing the slaves to the Americas. That we will discuss in the second part. But at the moment, please imagine the contrast between west and east. When Portuguese ventures into east, they come across a nation where different kind of civilizations are already existing, a civilization which I have been terming as Oriental, which are well versed with the exploitation of natural resources, and one of the primary natural resource which they have been exploiting was a spice trade, which means these two civilizations witness two different paths of progress towards global environmental conflict. That I will be trying to discuss when we meet next after a break of 5 minutes, 1 minute. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, viewers, once again, and let us begin where we left. And we must understand, I have been trying to divide this lecture into two: one pre-Columbian era, which I have been trying to discuss with you, and now post-Columbian era. Because when we discussed last that those who went to control western part as per the papal degree, they had a different kind of interaction, and those who came to eastern side, they had a different kind of experience. And in both ways, the natural resources were contested. So now this part is basically dealing with the post-Columbian phase, post-Columbus phase, and then its evidences of global environmental conflict. Let me begin with that. When we come across this sea route via South Africa to India, they witnessed two important features. One, the eastern part is well settled, well aware of its political apparatus, well aware of its natural resources, and a highly developed monetary economy as well. Highly developed monetary economy as well. The case in the west will be discussed later on, because let me focus this, because this is the focus where environmental conflict emerged to its fullest. Vasco da Gama, when he came to Cape of Good Hope and started moving northward towards the India, they reached the eastern coast of Africa, and from that, when they tried to cross Arabian Sea towards India, they were assisted by sailors, local sailors, who were well aware of monsoon winds. They have been relying on these monsoon winds since ancient past. We have evidence almost since pyramid era that the monsoon winds were being used by sailors from eastern coast of Africa to come to India. As you are aware that monsoon emerges in the Indian Ocean, it moves westward towards African continent, and on the eastern coast of African continent, it witnesses a barrier in terms of mountain ranges, and it reverts back. When it reverts back, it hits India. And these winds were used by traders since ancient times, because they were aware if we use these winds, we can easily cross Arabian Sea and reach the western coast of India. And that is why Calicut was very important in trading center. Cochin was later on emerged, Goa was not yet in picture, Bombay is nowhere in picture. It's basically Calicut, Zomorian kingdom, which was harboring these merchants who were coming from regions across Arabian Peninsula, Arabian Sea. So when they came to this area, what they witnessed that here they cannot control natural resources unless they devise a system through which the political opposition and the political power is subjugated to them. Most of the Indian peninsula had important land-based empires. Directly or indirectly, they had developed well-knit, well-established administrative apparatus where revenue from land resources were being used to sustain itself. merchant trading activity was important, but it was secondary to it. Second important thing which we must remember, India was not the place where things were demanded in terms of goods from West. Unlike West, where demand for goods from India, demands for goods from eastern part of Asia was required, which means even if this trade is not sustained, our sustenance will not be disturbed. But if this trade stops, then Western civilization will suffer a lot. This advantageous position of India, where it is importing from one hand and exporting it to other country, helped India maximize its profit. What we are doing, we were not using our natural resources for export. Rather, we were importing from east and transporting it to west. This peculiar position was difficult for Portuguese to capture, to control. Moreover, their own country, their own mother country was far away, and that too via South Africa, crossing the whole of of the African continent. So it was not physically possible for them to physically control Indian peninsula. So what they tried to do, they tried to monopolize trade which was passing through Indian Ocean. Two important consideration. But before we discuss that, please remember that during this period when Columbus is exploring, when Vasco da Gama is exploring, we also have Magellan, who had covered the whole, circumvented the whole globe from one part of it, began from Portugal and ultimately reached back Portugal. So he was the first person who gave this idea that Earth is circular and we can come to the same point if we keep on moving in one direction, which means the new parts of Asia, new parts of Africa were being explored. He was also able to realize that it is not easy to cross Pacific Ocean if you are trying to move from Asia to America. Moreover, it is European civilization which is exploring. To coming to Europe, they could realize that crossing the whole of Africa, whole of Pacific Ocean, they stuck at the Americas. And in the absence of Panama Canal, it was difficult for them to cross from a Pacific Ocean to Atlantic Ocean and come towards Europe. So they could realize that it is feasible for them to move via Indian Ocean either through tip of Africa or through Red Sea or through Persian Gulf. So the area of contest becomes basically Indian Ocean. They are not moving into basically towards Pacific Ocean. What Portuguese started doing, that they started controlling this seaborne trade. The major entry point of trade which was passing from India to Arab and Arab to West was either crossing through Persian Gulf or through Red Sea. At both the points, they stationed their navy. They are marine power. Indian civilization is basically land-based empire, and Portuguese are exploiting their marine resources with better compass, with better shipping machinery. They were able to control entry from Aden into Red Sea and entry from Hormuz towards Persian Gulf, so that trade which was passing through this was being channelized, controlled by Portuguese. But please remember, when this trade was stopped by the Islamic civilization, it was for religious purposes. But when Portugal started stopping this trade, it was not for religious purposes. What they were trying to do is that to recover the cost which they were incurring when they are using the longer route. If trade continues from the shorter routes, then they will not be able to maximize their profit. They can have profit only if this trade is stopped and monopoly over spice trade is established by Portugal. So they started cartage system. They started imposing a special tax on any good which is passing from Indian Ocean towards Arabian Sea and towards Arabian Peninsula and Europe, so that the cost of that good increases and it should match the cost which they are incurring in transporting their material through tip of Africa and crossing the whole of West Africa and reaching the Europe, which means the natural resources which are easily available in East were not being made easily available for the West, simply because these natural resources are being mediated by the presence of Portuguese Empire. In that process, they started controlling the western coast of India, and in that process they capture Goa, and later on they also capture Bombay. It's an interesting fact to note that it was the Portuguese emperor who donated island of Bombay in marriage of his sister to the King of England. Bombay was part of dowry to the King of England. A massive island was given in dowry, because that was the important trading center on western coast. So they gave access to the Britishers via Bombay. Earlier, Britishers were using only the port of Surat or the port of Madras on the eastern coast. On western coast, they get a major share with the getting of when they got this Bombay with them. Yes. Let me come back to Indian Ocean and discuss that, because that is very interesting dimension. When the Portuguese started controlling, they tried to control. The major problem for them was that if they want to purchase spices from India, they have to exchange it for bullion, gold. You have to supply your gold, because Indian civilization didn't require anything from West. They said, give us the gold and get the spices from me. Why India was in such advantageous position? Because it was exploiting its natural resources in a very peculiar manner. From the eastern coast of India, the cotton and rice, both are rice belt areas, Bengal to Tamil Nadu, and in between you have the major cotton producing areas as well, the black soil area, which means the eastern coast, which had rice producing area as well as cotton producing area, were producing these two commodities which were being exported or traded for the spices with the civilizations in Malaya, Java, Sumatra, and the spices are procured from them. They were in requirement of basic need, food and clothing, and the food and clothing was provided by Indian civilization. India benefited in another manner also. They are exporting not only the raw cotton, but they were also converting that raw cotton into textile, and that textile was exported. If Portuguese want to control this trade, and if they want to control exit of bullion from them, their problem was they required rice and cotton. Both these natural resources were not available with the Portugal. So they were dependent on this internal trade link between India and Java Sumatra area, India and the far distant civilization. This peculiar natural resources led to intensification of conflict over these resources in the Indian Ocean, which means Indian Ocean resources are now being contested by European civilizations. Let me also suggest and make you aware that the cotton which was being produced on the eastern coast had sustained massive silk industry and cotton producing industry all across eastern coast, beginning from Bengal or from Murshidabad, Dhaka to the tip of Indian Peninsula. They were producing textile, good quality of textile, the textile which was supplied to along with rice to the civilization in Java Sumatra area, and from them spices were procured, and that spice was traded in exchange of gold with the Portuguese. So Portuguese on the one hand were trying to control trade which is passing through the Arabian Sea, so that their margin of profit is not disturbed and a monopoly is retained by the Portuguese Empire, but they were not able to challenge this peculiar condition, peculiar position which was enjoyed by the Indian civilization, because they were producer of two important natural commodities which were highly in demand when you try to procure spices from east. Let me once again make you realize that it is these environmental resources which are being conflicted, which are being in contest, which are being challenged. Nation coming from all across Europe is not able to make a major dent in this trade simply because they don't have access to that natural resource, which was mandatory requirement if you want to procure spices from Far East. Which means this period also witnessed another kind of environmental conflict. You are trying to dominate the areas of tropics where goods like cotton and rice is being produced and which can be traded for spices. When you contrast this with the western experience of Spain, then you will realize the importance of this. What happens when we move to Americas? Then we realize that in America, unlike this highly developed system which we had seen in the East, they were they were developing for themselves, they were self-sustaining societies, and they were least interested in long distance trade network, which Asia was part of. Since they were not really interested in long distance trade network, so their economy was geared towards self-sustenance. Whereas the concern of European power, Spain, basically primarily Spain, later on England also ventures, and then the France also venture. I am not discussing that we'll discuss later on. But the Spain, when Spain tried to control that area, soon they realized that we need to intervene in the production processes. Only then we can use or exploit the natural resources of this area for the benefit of their own country. What they required is agrarian produce. What agrarian produce? Soon they realized that these areas are good for agrarian production. So they started plantation economy. Sugarcane, cotton, major dominant crops. They also went for coffee and tea. That I am not discussing, but please remember they were also important goods. Let me also briefly mention here, we will discuss this in our next lecture, that this global interaction opened up possibilities of new kind of vegetables, new kind of crops being introduced in America from old world and into new crops from America. Potato was not here, chilies, tomato, etc. were being exchanged between new world and the old world, which means the conflict over agrarian resources is changing its nature. Now, potato becomes mainstay of sustenance in Ireland. 1840s, the moment their potato crop fails, the society is almost wiped out. Potato, which was not available in Europe prior to 16th century. That is the kind of environmental conflicts which I am trying to discuss. That it was able to control all this area because potato provided a very good source of protein and carbohydrate. So they were using that, relying on that. That we'll discuss later on. But at the moment, please remember that we'll discuss in terms of green imperialism, as Richard Grove has called green imperialism. We will discuss that. Let me focus on a Spanish experiment in America, because then we'll understand what kind of global environmental conflicts are emerging. They are controlling the sea, they are controlling that area, and in control of that, they needed resources which justifies their control over Americas. It's a trading community, it's a trading nation. It knows unless profit is secured, unless profit is made, we will not be able to sustain our civilization. To sustain that, they required resources from American continent, basically South American continent. So what they are trying to do, they are trying to develop plantation economy, which can provide basic raw material which can be used in the mainland of Europe, especially in Spain. They are also in conflict with the Portuguese. So if they get more and more sugarcane, more and more cotton, then they will be in a better position to bargain with the Portuguese, which means they need to develop this area. In developing this area, they tried to control, and they did control politically the Aztec Empire and the existing civilization of South America. And they were forced to move, those civilizations were forced to move from sustenance to profit making civilization. Profit for the Spain, profit not for the their own civilization, which means a kind of colonialism is emerging. The beginning of colonialism can be seen here, which attains a different position later on. What I am trying to suggest that the land resources, the human resources of South American continent are now being used, relied, exploited by European nations. So Spain is trying to use control over natural resources like land as well as human resources. When they witness that the population is not sufficient, and when England also comes to the picture and they start colonizing the eastern coast of Northern America and establish 13 colonies, they soon realize that they lack human power. They have land, plenty of land is available. It's a continent. Europe is a small continent, America is a massive continent. The land is available in plenty, natural resources are available in plenty, the water is in good supply. What they lack was natural resource in terms of human population. So they required intervention of human population, for which they ventured into western part of Africa and they started importing slaves from that area to cultivate the land which is available in the Americas. Now, land resource of America is exploited, human resource of Africa is exploited to sustain the civilization in Europe. That is what I am trying to argue is the global environmental conflicts, where three continents are involved and all the three are trying to control, conserve and yet fight for the natural resources, basically in terms of land and human population. Please remember, I am deliberately avoiding any mention of industrial revolution. It is yet to take place. We will discuss that subsequently. But prior to industrial revolution, it was mandatory for them to have control over natural resources, land as well as energy resources in terms of population, human population. So we witnessed that. This phase economically is also can be explained in another manner, and I have tried to summarize that when you discuss that. The phase is also known as mercantilism. Mercantilism, where you have limited bullion, limited land, because Europe, America is not yet explored, Africa is not yet explored, limited resources and limited human resource. So these limitations were conditioning exploitation of nature. As soon as these limitations are broken or overcome, soon you realize a new kind of intensification of conflicts. Soon you realize that bullion, which was in shortage, which was in limited quantity, which Portugal is finding it difficult to supply to India to procure spices, suddenly made available from America. You come across silver mines, and those silver mines ultimately lead to price rise in Spain, and the whole Europe is affected by that. Till that point, it is very clearly realized that the bullion is limited, so every society, every state is trying to monopolize that, control that. That is what Portugal is also doing. Establish their monopoly on a spice trade so that profit can be maximized. Similarly, the land was limited till pre-Columbian era. Now, land is available in plenty, Africa and both the Americas. America I have been discussing. Africa, you will realize that towards the end of 19th century, when Italy and Germany emerges as a nation, then they divide Africa, and partition of Africa takes place towards the end of 19th century. Initially, it was the coastal area which is being exploited. In South America, since civilization was there, so they were being used to move into interiors, but when you come to North America, the westward expansion and move towards California takes place much later. Initially, it is only the eastern part of North America, that is the close to Atlantic Sea, which was being used by British power, and they were relying on the human resources supplied from the Western Africa. So, a kind of integration is taking place where various resources from different continents are being contested, used, manipulated, and conflicts are being managed. At times, these conflicts could not be managed, so we witness war. Wars were natural, regular feature. I am not venturing into wars because that is a political history at the moment, but you must realize that most of the time these conflicts which resulted in war were over natural resources, either for the control of human population or either for the control of land. At times for the control of agrarian production of that area, and at times for the mineral resources of that area, which means when you read the expansion of geographical exploration during 15th, 16th century, then you realize that these are basically period when a conflict for environment, conflict for natural resources is being intensified and new kind of systems are developing. I have been discussing mercantilism of late. These processes which developed during mercantilism, basically the factory system, soon provides impetus for industrial revolution. We will discuss that subsequently, because the dependence on human power, the dependence on human resource compels them to seek an alternative, develop an alternative. Otherwise, conflict over these resources is multiplying. One of the manifestation was slave economy in North America. As soon as industrial revolution takes place and human energy resource is replaced by abiotic source of energy, basic in terms of fossil fuel, you witness another kind of conflict. At this moment, we are witnessing conflict for agrarian resources, we are witnessing conflict over forest resources, we are witnessing conflict over natural resources of human population, but later on you witness conflict over fossil fuel. The whole of Middle East being contested among the various nations, because they are trying to control that energy resource which is visible, which is available in the central part of Asia, the Western Asia, which means the nature of conflict over natural resources also change as and when we intervene in a different manner to exploit natural resources. So, the geographical exploration not only opened new vistas for exploitation of natural resources, it also provided impetus for further growth or transition from feudal economy to capital economy. I would like to conclude by suggesting that Professor Harbans Mukhia, in his famous article on Was There Feudalism in Indian Civilization, he begins with a classic statement: capitalism is the first world system. Prior to that, every formation was basically regional, and mercantilism moves towards capitalism, beginning of capitalism. So, as far as history and historians are concerned, the global concerns emerge with the end of or towards the beginning of capitalism during the phase of geographical exploration. New kind of resources, agrarian, new kind of resources in terms of access to land formation are emerging, so much so that later on you see that humans are connecting two major oceans and eliminating the landmass from between these two oceans. One is Suez Canal, another is Panama. In both cases, what they did, they connected two oceans. This is area of conflict. The construction of Suez is highly challenged, and similarly the construction of Panama was highly challenged. What I am trying to suggest, that the nature of global environmental conflict changes its nature, changes its focus from one resource to another resource, from land based empire to ocean based empire. The power which can control the movement across oceans is becoming major power, because the trade is now taking through ocean. Ships coming from America via Atlantic, if they can be intercepted, the power which can intercept becomes important. Britain very soon attains that position, which Portugal has attained in Indian Ocean during the 16th century. In 17th century, Portugal was replaced by the Dutch civilization, but Dutch had a different mechanism. They were not trying to monopolize the trading activity, rather they ventured into primary production areas. They tried to colonize that land itself from where spices are being procured or produced, and soon they were able to replace Portugal from the sea. So these conflicts are over natural resources, and we need to be very careful while reading history that it is the resources which have been in contest over centuries. Thank you.
On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and thank you dear friends for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.